the team that we should start with here, and we'll start with the SEC. And I thought you did a great job explaining the importance of scheduling non-conference. And Florida, who's a team that's kind of gutted year 2 for Napier, but they have the toughest non-conference in the SEC. Let's start with the Gators here, Jerry.
Yeah, well, the thing about Florida is they've got to go to Utah. And Utah is, the 2-time defending Pac-12 champion? So they're going to be competitive. That's probably going to be at least a top 15 team. And, you want to get off to a good start. That's not really the game you want to try and get off to a good start. Now, last year, of course, they won that game, but it didn't hold Utah back. So for Florida, I think if you want a good start and you want to show that you can compete in the SEC East, at least behind Georgia, this is an important game for them.
Jerry, the other big dog in the Power 5 landscape, obviously the Big Ten, and it's kind of funny, the two biggest dogs in that big dog conference are on opposite ends of the toughest and easiest schedule spectrum this year with Michigan and Ohio State.
Yeah, well, Michigan, this is the second year in a row. They're not playing anybody. I mean, no one with a pulse, and that's intentional. I mean, they're taking the first 3 games to use as scrimmages. Last year, they were settling a quarterback controversy. That won't be a problem this year. But they know they're going to get 2 really good opponents for sure in Ohio State and Penn State in their division every year. So they're letting the conference carry their schedule for them for the College Football Playoff Committee and using their 3 non-conference games as basically, a little bit more than a scrimmage. So it's and now this year, Harbaugh's not going to coach any of those games. He's going to serve a 3-game suspension. So, but I mean, let's face it, any of us could coach those games, right? It's just, put your starting lineups out there and then pull them at some point, ideally. So, yeah, Michigan, pretty bad schedule. But let's face it, nobody in the Big Ten is really testing themselves, with the possible exception of Ohio State, who's going to play at Notre Dame. Now, the other 2 games are not exciting, but at least they're going to play at Notre Dame. But you can count on one hand with fingers to spare the number of games in either the Big Ten or the SEC that get you excited about non-conference play. And I think I threw an honorable mention for Purdue because they're at least playing 2 Power 5 teams, both from the ACC, Syracuse at home and Virginia Tech on the road. Those are not necessarily great teams, but they're still Power Conference teams, and they play reigning Mountain West champion Fresno State.
Jerry Palm joining us here. Sharp Money, VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. We're talking non-conference strength of schedule. Great article over at CBS Sports. You should check it out. Let's talk about the Pac-12, Jerry, while we still can. The toughest as far as non-conference, Colorado. The weakest, and Jared was just talking about Oregon State, and the Beavers have high expectations this year. Non-con, they should be able to get it done.
Yeah, I think so, too. I mean, San Diego State is a decent program, but they get them at home. San Jose State, I think Oregon State's schedule is set up for them to have some momentum going into conference play, and that's my sleeper in that league. Oregon State's going to be really feisty this year, being left behind as everybody else goes out the door, and they're going to be tough to beat. So, maybe 10 wins for them this year is a possibility, especially if they can take care of business at home. That non-conference schedule sets them up, for a nice soft start going into what should be a really competitive top of the Pac-12 in its likely final year of existence. And by the way, when we talk about strength of schedule, from the betting perspective, this helps you with win totals because you try and figure out what these teams are going to do in the conference, but their non-conference schedule might be the difference between an over and an under on a win total.
Yeah, that's why I love Oregon State's over 8 wins this year because of that early start. 3 wins you would expect right out of the gate. You get 3 dubs, and then you move forward from there. The Big 12, I mean, listen, most of the time they're an afterthought in terms of the national picture. Maybe Texas kind of gets into the race a little bit. They've got a tough game against Alabama, and there's a couple of other very interesting Big 12 non-conference games this year. Texas Tech against Oregon, and West Virginia going to go play my Nittany Lions up in Happy Valley. But on the other end of the spectrum, there is a team that has a pretty easy non-conference schedule in the Big 12.
Yeah, it's the Big 12 is, now they only play 3 non-conference games. So, you don't have a lot to work with. And the schools, the new members, the BYU and Cincinnati, Houston, those schools are disadvantaged because, they didn't really, they had to adjust. And especially BYU, who was playing as an independent, had to dump a bunch of games to get ready to play this non-conference schedule, a conference schedule, for the first time in a while for BYU. So they end up with schedules that are not quite as good. that league, Texas is a favorite, and I have a hard time trusting Texas as a favorite. But I also have a hard time trusting Oklahoma because they haven't gotten off to a great start under Brent Venables. And now, we're supposed to believe in them again this year. I'm not so sure. And that's a program when they go to the SEC is going to have to step things up a notch or they could really get left in the dust there. But the Big 12 was in the national picture last year with TCU getting to the championship game.
It's true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go ACC. And you mentioned, Jerry, over at CBSSports.com, as far as non-con schedule, like the SEC, every ACC team will play 4 non-conference games with one coming against an FCS opponent. Let's go down to the toughest. And how about Georgia Tech? Of course, a rivalry with Georgia, but I guess the good news for Georgia Tech, you get them at home this year. I'm sure that'll make it easier. And then also another SEC SEC
for Georgia
matchup.
Tech. I mean, they're just not equipped to play that game. They're just not.
No.
I like for as much fun as I make of non-conference schedules, I like the fact that you've got 4 in-state rivalries that cross the ACC-SEC border. And the most interesting of those this year is Clemson and South Carolina, because you've got a Clemson team that's a potential, playoff contender, and an up-and-coming South Carolina team to get Spencer Rattler back again this year. And, Shane Beamer's done a really good job with that program. So I think that game is going to be a lot of fun. And usually when you see a team in either of those leagues playing a strong non-conference schedule, it's because their rival in the other league is a good team. And for Georgia Tech, I mean, they can play Georgia and 3 Atlanta high schools, and that's still going to be a really difficult schedule because Georgia.
Jerry, I know that this is probably tough to predict because the schedules are so locked in years in advance. But with all this conference realignment, what is the future of non-conference scheduling in major, high, Power 5 college football?
Yeah, I think you're going to see some weaker schedules maybe because, especially in the Big Ten and the SEC, where you're going to really be top heavy with big name programs. And, if you've got to play 2 or 3 of those in your conference play, and then you're still going to have some other teams that are good, but maybe not that level, you might not want to do too much damage to yourself in non-conference play. TV will set up some good matchups. They always will. In non-conference play, but it might be that the only really good matchups we get are the ones that TV wants to put together.
Jerry Palm, CBS Sports. Where'd you go for vacation? You had 4 months, Jerry. I'm just curious. Where'd you go? Did you go away? Did you enjoy yourself?
Well, we did a lot of little weekend things here and there for vacation trips this year. I had a kid at Harvard for the summer, and I had a kid getting ready to go back to Purdue. So actually 2 of them going back to Purdue. So when you've got college kids around the house, there's not a whole lot we can do. But we took weekend trips here and there, and probably the biggest one, I guess, is when we took 9 people to Central Indiana Lake and had a just weekend hanging out on the lake.
Harvard and Purdue.
Genius.
Well done, Jerry.
Smart family.
Well done, my friend. Smart kids.
Yeah.
Awesome job.
The old blockhead.
JP Palm, CBS on Twitter. Of course, the brackets during college hoops, and of course, college football writer over at CBS Sports. Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.